Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Friday, August 9th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about Colorado. I had a segment earlier in the week that has ruffled a little bit of feathers. I want to kind of clarify some things with that segment and kind of just talk about Colorado in a broad sense and how they face some hurdles that some other teams just don't face. Then we'll get into some of the biggest leaps that the title contenders this year need to take. We'll start with the big four teams that we've usually been starting these with, and we'll continue this throughout the next couple of days on this show. And then we'll get into the players that just have to have a big fall camp. We'll finish it out today. A couple of teams that are a little bit sneaky teams in their conference. Maybe not big-time conference contenders, but absolutely could get into that realm if they have a good year. Then we'll finish out conference questions with the Big 12 today. Absolutely want more questions from you all. If you have any, please put them in the comments and I will absolutely get to them on next week's shows. And then we'll get into a little bit of a Friday headline catch-up. There were a ton of different headlines that came out, especially a very interesting one from FIU, but we'll get to that at the very end of the show. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, but also we now have a super chat. If you're on YouTube, if you're on the Sports Network YouTube, you can see below the chat, you can see a little $sign there. We would love to get any of your comments that you possibly could have. If it's questions, if it's comments, if it's, telling me I'm a dummy. I'm all for any of that type of stuff. So you can use the super chat, super thanks, super stickers, use all of that type of stuff to get your word in, and I will absolutely put you on the screen, or it will automatically put you on the screen, and we'll be able to kind of have a fun conversation here. So if you'd love to use that, that would be a huge help to us, obviously, but also to you all. We get to kind of have a fun, interactive experience here, and that's always what I've wanted to set up. Now, if tip and donation is not the way, if super chat is not the way you want to go about it, we still do have the tip and donation link, gsmcpodcast.net, so no worries there. If you'd rather do that, please just jump on over to there, but makes it a little bit easier for you all to get your name out there, get it on the screen using that super chat feature. So more than welcome to use that if you would like, but let's jump on in here and let's talk about Colorado, because there's a ton of things happening around Colorado, as there often are. There is tons of headlines that come out of Colorado pretty much every single week, and it's one of those programs where you have to be a little bit wary, right? You have to make sure that what you're reading is exactly what happened, because there are a lot of people that have plenty of opinions about Deion. And there's a number of things that kind of play into this, but I want to do this segment for a couple of different reasons. One, the conversation around Colorado as we head into the season has gotten just a little bit ridiculous overall, and it's just gotten a little bit out of hand in terms of the way that we view this team without, with keeping the Deion in your mind. The way people view this team is very different than, I think, just the football side of it or the program side of it, and I'll get into that in here in a second. But the second reason is probably the bigger reason. I did a segment earlier this week talking about the article that came out from Athlon, talking about a couple of different athletes from Colorado that had left the program and had some very interesting quotes. Some quotes that were not too glowing about this Colorado program, saying Cormani McClain was bullied throughout his time by Deion Sanders, saying that Jordan Seaton had to prove his manhood by fighting another offensive lineman in the locker room. Tons of stuff that is pretty grandiose and pretty crazy. And I understand that I did this segment a couple of days ago, I believe on Monday, if I'm not mistaken, Tuesday, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and I've gotten some comments that have led me to believe I didn't do quite a good enough of a job just kind of letting everyone know that this is not necessarily totally true. I tried my best to say if when I was addressing all of the claims that happened on here, but at the end of the day, I obviously didn't do quite a good enough of a job. So first of all, apologies if I, put anything out there saying this absolutely happened or Colorado has a terrible culture or anything like that. Was more just trying to comment on a very, very interesting article that I thought we should talk about on here, but tried my best to make sure that everyone understood this is all just talk, this is all just conjecture and rumors right now. Obviously, I did not do quite a good a job of that as I would have liked. So, obviously, apologies to anyone that was upset, apologies to Deion and Colorado, because I don't want to peddle any rumors that are not real. And that's actually the second part of this, where it sounds like that article is at the very least embellished. It's not to say, certain things weren't happening back there that ruffled some feathers, but the reality is everyone has different perspectives. You have 130 guys in that locker room right now. They all have a different perspective of what's going on, and some guys are going to leave and they're going to have sour grapes. That's just the way this is going to work, especially around a guy like Deion. That's the way this is going to work. I don't necessarily anticipate this stopping at any point, but I kind of just wanted to talk about it because it's definitely something that, I wanted to do the piece on Thursday just to kind of talk about this article and talk about all the findings, but I absolutely did not want to bury Colorado as a program or act like they're doing everything wrong over there, because frankly, I don't feel that way at all. So I'll get into this a little bit, and I want to just kind of paint Colorado and Deion in particular as what he is. Not necessarily with all of the different headlines going around, not necessarily with all of the opinions, more of just kind of what has happened in his college football career. So he came into college football in 2020. Since then, he has been 31-14 as a head coach. He elevated someone like Jackson State to a level that, frankly, I don't know if they were ever thought they were going to be at. Got hired at Colorado, and ever since then, from where I'm standing, they've been improving. They've been getting better on the field, and frankly, they've been getting better off the field. It's hard for me to say that a culture is totally broken, is totally all over the place, when I'm not hearing many, claims that, kids are getting in trouble with the law or anything is happening out there. That's not happening at Colorado. And the way that some people talk about Colorado and Deion, you would think they were getting tons of arrests and tons of things off the field that were distracting them. The only thing off the field that you really have to worry about is some of these guys are going to talk a little bit. Some of these guys are a little bit boisterous, and that's well and good. That's sports. And so it's one of those things that it feels like a weird thing that's kind of happened ever since Deion has shown up on the scene, especially at Colorado, where you have this energy around him like he has to do better than everyone else. It's not necessarily from a perspective of coaching football games, because if he goes out and wins 9 football games this year, no one's going to question too much. But at the end of the day, it feels like whenever he is on tape, whenever he is in front of a microphone and he has to, speak to the world, he has to dance around a little bit more than everyone else. And frankly, he doesn't dance around too much. That's part of the reason that he's so fun to watch and it's such a big story of the sport. But overall, it feels like his words are dissected maybe more than pretty much anyone else in this industry. So it's kind of one of those weird conversations where there are things about Deion's program at Colorado that I don't necessarily love. I've talked about it on here. I don't necessarily think the way that they're going about roster construction is really the way to build a big-time, long-term program. That's my personal belief. Obviously, that could change over the next couple of years as he kind of develops a little bit more out there. But overall, I think when you look at this program, when you look at the bare bones of this program, I am seeing yearly improvement from a talent perspective, from a coaching perspective, and from a culture perspective in so many different ways. All of these articles are going to come out. The Athlon article is not going to be alone this year. I can almost promise you that. There will be plenty of other people that are trying to, get a couple of clicks on their article and use that to kind of bash Deion. And I promise that was not what I was trying to do on Tuesday, but it obviously came off that way. So again, apologies for that. But it's one of those things that Colorado, talks a lot. That's who they are. They are outward. They are loud. That's kind of the energy that Deion brings. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing by any means. It does bring some expectations. There's no two ways about that. It does bring some things that are a little bit tougher to deal with, are a little bit tougher to kind of navigate as you get through this. So if you're a college football program and you're doing everything right, you're hitting all the right buttons, you're getting more talented guys in that room, which Colorado desperately needed. I think that's one of the big things that is kind of left out of the conversation of how much the turnover happened and how many guys were, just told they had to leave, and all of the different things that happened behind the scenes that weren't necessarily the greatest way for things to go about. They had to happen. Yes, kids got their feelings hurt. Yes, he was a little bit more harsh than some other coaches around the country, but they were a 1-11 team. They were a 1-11 team that had very little talent on that roster. You had to rebuild. You had to rebuild. You had to reload. You had to essentially tear it down to the studs and rebuild from scratch. And that's what Deion has done. And he's done it really, really well to this point. Now, there has been a little bit of talk about them going to the playoff or going to the Big 12 title and all of that type of stuff. And that is one of those things that, is up in the air. You can talk me into that possibly happening. I'm a little bit further away from that. I do have them going 6-6 this season. I think 6-6 is a win. Call me crazy. I think 6-6 is exactly where they need to be this upcoming year, or better, obviously. But if they can get to that point, they're still moving forward. From year one, or from the year before when he came there to year one, they were 3 wins more. That is a big marketable improvement in pretty much any program across the country. If they bounce up into making a bowl game and possibly winning that, going 7-6 or 8-5, whatever that looks like, you have to feel incredible about this program, regardless of if they didn't make the playoff or if Deion Sanders isn't drafted number 5 overall or number 1 overall in the draft. None of that really matters. What matters is what's happening on the football field, and from where I'm standing, Colorado is getting a ton better on the football field every single year, and they're addressing the areas that need to be addressed on this team. When you look last year, the line of scrimmage was just an absolute nightmare. They got bullied pretty much every single week. They went out and got as many guys as they possibly could to fix that problem. Now, is it going to work out exactly the way that they want? I think it'll be a little bit of a learning curve, but it doesn't change that you saw a problem, you addressed it. That's what college football is about. That's what building a program is about. So overall, I think you look at this Colorado team, and I just always wonder, you take Deion out of the equation. You take all of the feelings that people have about Deion from his time at Colorado, or even from before that when he was an athlete and, all over everyone's TV. There were a number of opinions that were held back then that are still held. And I wonder, you take Deion out of it. It's just a nameless, faceless person running that program. We're looking at it as one of the biggest success stories over the last couple of years out of anyone in the country. Yes, it's a little unorthodox. Yes, it's a little bit different than the way that people have normally been going about business. It doesn't make it not effective, and it doesn't mean that he's not taking steps forward. Is there a plateau there? That is a question that I definitely have about this program. When you're bringing in so many new guys, there definitely could be a plateau at some point where maybe you can't get over 9 wins, or maybe you can't get over 10 wins. But the reality is they're getting better. And that's the goal always. They're getting better on the field, and frankly, they seem to be getting better off the field. Everyone in that locker room seems to be talking incredibly glowingly about this, especially after that article came out that was trying to tear it down a little bit. They've been outwardly, very, very outward spoken about how good this area is, how good this program is, and how good the coaches are to them. So I fully understand that people are going to have opinions about Colorado. I fully understand that Deion creates a lot of energy around that program, and with that come expectations and comes a lot of people commenting on what you're doing. All I'm saying is if you strip down all of the other stuff, if you strip down all of the outward stuff that has nothing to do with football, you would see a program that is getting better in pretty much every aspect, whether it's talent level, NIL, all of that stuff is coming into place more and more under Deion Sanders, and I'm having a hard time sitting here and acting like he's doing anything really wrong. I understand the first part of it was a little bit bumpy with some very not nice conversations in the background, but those had to happen. For this program to get where they want to be, they had to happen. So overall, want to first of all just apologize if I made anyone think that the rumors in that Athlon article were entirely true. Not at all. What I was trying to do in that was just trying to tell a story of a very interesting article that came out. But on top of that, just want to remind everyone that when you look at Deion and Colorado, just take all the biases out of it. Do yourself that favor at the very least. Take the bias out of it and look at them as a football program, and you'll see a really, really impressive building job from Deion and company. But we'll see what happens there. Obviously, the hurdles will continue to be thrown at them with a lot of these articles that come out and everything in between. But we'll keep you updated with everything you got to know around there. As far as I'm concerned, this is a program moving in the right direction and has no intention on stopping right now. So it'll be a really interesting thing to watch. But let's take our first break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the 4 big-time college football championship contenders. When you talk about Texas, Georgia, Ohio State, and Oregon, they tend to be setting the pace in the college football world. I want to get into where they need to improve the most from 2023. Where was the area in 2023 that didn't come together the way they want it to? And if it does in 2024, they're right there where they need to be for a national title. So we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the updates from all of the different things going on around Colorado. There have been a number of different things bouncing around the Twitter sphere. One article that was not remotely true in a lot of different ways, and then a post from Colorado that got a lot of people going on Twitter. I'll just leave it at that for the time being. If you know what I'm talking about, it was very, very funny discourse on Twitter the last couple of days. But let's get into segment 2 here, and let's talk about the biggest change that needs to happen for title contenders from the 2023 season. You know, you have to make that big-time leap in one specific place if you want to be a title contender the following year. And frankly, there are a couple that have popped up on this team throughout the offseason that we've talked about, but these are specifically ones that they did not do well in 2023 that they just need to do well in 2024. So let's jump into this, and I want to start with the Texas Longhorns. And they had a real big red zone problem in 2023. When you look at this team, there were a couple of things that kept them from, first of all, blowing out a lot of the teams that were really, really close against. The TCU, Kansas State, Houston game, all of those games should have been more, and Texas left a lot on the table in the red zone. And then number 2, probably playing at least, or possibly winning a national title, because you go back to that Washington game, there was an area where they had a number of shots at the end zone. They got one kind of good shot. That was pretty much it. So let's break this down a little bit. I think when you talk about this, the best way to kind of illustrate it is Burt Auburn, the kicker over at Texas, one of the best hairs in all of college football, but he attempted the most kicks in the country, tied with the Texas A&M kicker, and he's a great kicker. You want him on the field when you need him, but that's too many times. For an offense that has this many talented players, has a play caller that is among the best, some argue the best in the country, you need to be able to get in the end zone. And this falls on a number of different things. But they had 4 downs in the Oklahoma game at the 1-yard line. Had jumbo sets for pretty much every one of the plays. Could not get in the end zone. And that comes down to the interior offensive line just being able to explode off the ball a little bit more and get that push that they very much need in those short yardage situations. I think another piece of this is when you talk about Quinn Ewers, there were times when he was just a little bit late on a read, and this is actually a picture that I'm showing you of a pick that happened in the Oklahoma game. He was trying to hit JT Sanders over the middle of the field. If he was half a second earlier on that play, I think he probably has a touchdown. He was just a little bit late. It got jarred out by Billy Bowman, who's standing over him right there, and it was picked off by Oklahoma, and that was a huge turning point in that game. So it's one of those things that you're actively leaving points on the table. And it happened again in the Washington game where you're sitting at the 10-yard line. You have 4 shots at a national title, win that game, move on to the national title. You get one kind of good shot, and the kind of good shot was above Adonai Mitchell's head and was knocked out of bounds with very little question. So it wasn't necessarily that great of a shot. I understand what they were trying to do on that play, but it didn't work out the way that they wanted to. So obviously this comes down to a couple of different things. We talked about the interior offensive line just needs to be a little bit more explosive in those short yardage situations, because all you need is a yard, but you need to get that yard pushed, and it's quite hard to do. Let's just be totally honest, but they got to take a step forward there. They're returning all 3 interior offensive linemen, so got to feel a little bit better in that respect. Quinn Ewers has to be more precise. We talked about that. The timing has been a little bit off. The footwork has been one of his big-time worries throughout his college career, and if he can take a step forward there, he can hit all the windows that you want him to hit. they're going to be more than fine. But that's definitely a step forward that needs to be taken. The running backs need to be a little bit more physical in that near goal line area. Obviously, losing CJ Baxter hurts that a little bit, but you can see plenty of times where Jaden Blue runs with aggression, plenty of times where Trey Wisner can, get into that meld. So it's not necessarily a huge worry. I have Jarrett Gibson, the freshman that came in, is the guy I'm really watching because the dude is just an outright bowling ball. But more than anything else, I think Sark's just got to be more precise with his play calling. I think he does incredible work when he has the field to work with, right? There's so many different motions, there's so many different orbits and RPOs and so many different things they can play around with. Your playbook gets shrunk when you get inside the 20. That's just the reality of this sport, and you got to be able to put your best guys on the field, got to make sure that you're putting them in a position to get in that end zone, and there were a couple of play calls last year that just missed the mark for the most part. So if they can take a step forward there, if they can score more points and turn the 3 into 6 or the 6 into 7, they're going to be more than fine. There's no two ways about that. This is going to be maybe one of the best offenses in the entire country if they can take that step forward. But it was a huge problem a year ago, and if it's not fixed this year, I can promise you they're going to lose more games than they did a year ago. But let's get into Georgia here. I'm taking a little bit longer than I want here, but let's get into Georgia and let's talk about the pass rush that they need this upcoming year, because in 2023 it was just a little bit different. And frankly, that entire UGA defense was a little bit different, particularly the defensive front. When you talk about the pass rushing ability, they didn't necessarily have that guy. I think Mykel Williams came on late and made some number of really incredible plays throughout the year. I think Jalen Walker is a really fun player that flashes at times, but overall last year there weren't consistency at that position, and that's really where you kind of separate yourself from everyone else in the SEC, and especially in those big time games against teams like Jalen Milroe and Alabama. Being able to get him on the ground is the number one thing. So if they were able to do that, I think they'd be in a much better position. But as of right now, it doesn't necessarily look too pretty. But they got plenty of options. We talked about Jalen Walker. We talked about Mykel Williams. Those are the guys. Those are the guys that have to be stepping up, playing bigger roles this upcoming year. And it's something that is kind of interesting when you go into this SEC year. It's something that Cole Kublik was talking about on his show, where he said, this is the first year that he can remember, and he's been covering this conference for quite some time. He said this is the first year he can remember where the conference O-lines are ahead of the conference D-lines, which is going to be maybe the most important thing in this conference. It's actually one of the reasons that I like Texas in this conference so much, because their pass rushing group is about as deep, as solid as you find in this conference. Ole Miss is right up there as well, but I do think you look at the Texas group, interior will obviously play a role in this, but when you can get to the passer, you're going to have a ton of success. And in a world where the SEC, that's always really good at getting to the passer, it's not necessarily finding itself quite as much this year. I think someone like Texas has tons of options at their disposal and might be able to do a little bit more against that group. But getting back to Georgia, I think the guy that's going to lead this, the guy that's going to lead the way in this and possibly even win awards at the end of the year is Mykel Williams. He's the one that kind of sets this whole defense off. He is, in my opinion, the best defensive player on that side. You can make a very good argument for Malachi Starks, and frankly, they're 1A, 1B. But at the end of the day, I think this guy is an absolute game wrecker. I think he's someone that could find himself in the top 5 of the NFL draft, depending on how this year goes. So I think this is one of those issues that if they can get it fixed, they're right back where they want to be. They are back to being a really dominant defense, even if you have some of the interior struggles that they expect to have. If you can get to the quarterback, if you can collapse the pocket the other direction and still be able to hold up enough to keep him where he is, you'll be more than fine. So I think the pass rush is going to take enough of a step forward. How much is going to define, how far ahead everyone else is, or how far behind everyone else is from Georgia. But overall, will definitely be a huge thing to watch. Ohio State, it's easy. It's consistency at quarterback. They absolutely need this. This is the number one change in the entirety of college football when you talk about how obvious this is for this team. Kyle McCord, frankly, I think was a little bit dunked on for just executing last year. I don't necessarily think he was quite as bad as some people say, but at the end of the day, when you look at those big-time games, when you look at the 3 games they played that had the most on the table in Notre Dame, Penn State, and Michigan, he was 3 touchdowns, 2 picks, never topped 300 yards, was below his average completion percentage. So didn't necessarily give you what you want by any means in terms of a consistency perspective in those big time games, and you're hoping to get more of that from Will Howard. And frankly, from what I've been watching of Will Howard, he is more of that quarterback. And the good news for them is when I talk about consistency at quarterback, I'm not necessarily saying he has to top what the completion percentage or he needs to hit every pass or anything like that. Will Howard's superpower is he has the legs that Kyle McCord didn't. He has the ability to extend plays, to get down the field, to make plays with his legs in open field. Kyle McCord didn't have that, and that opens this offense so much more. So when I talk about consistency, obviously you want to see that passing come forward because that's the big-time worry you have about Will Howard. In fact, he never had a completion percentage higher than what Kyle McCord had a year ago throughout his career. So that's going to be the big-time worry here, but the good news is consistency means just making that play, moving the ball down the field, and if that's with his legs, that's more than fine for me. So I do think it's one of those things that maybe you don't take that big of a step forward when it comes to, completion percentage, the passing game being where you want it to be, but in terms of just the quarterback making the plays that need to be made, I have very few questions about what Will Howard can do this upcoming year. Moving on to Oregon, the back-end defense needs to be better. There's no two ways about that. I think when you look at what you watched last year, particularly against Washington, this might be the most obvious of the bunch. And to be fair, this plays into a lot of different parts of that defense. It's not necessarily that the back-end was just outright bad a year ago and they didn't have the guys back there. Frankly, they probably needed to upgrade a little bit, but overall, this goes into pass rush. It goes into interior defensive line getting the push that they need and forcing some of the, obvious passing situations that make it a little bit easier to cover on the back end. And all of that different stuff plays into this. But at the end of the day, you're 65th in pass yards allowed a year ago. If they repeat that this year, they will not be able to compete. I'm just being totally honest because Ohio State and Michigan were number 1 and 2 in that category a year ago. And frankly, I'd be surprised if Ohio State wasn't right back where they were a year ago this year. So it's one of those things that you're going to need to take that step forward because everyone around you has already taken that step forward. Everyone around you is already in a position where they love their back end. They feel totally confident and they're going to move forward and feel great about whatever wide receiver group they set up against. Now, Oregon, I think, should feel pretty great. No doubt about that. You add someone like Jabbar Muhammad, everything changes in a second. He is one of the best corners. A year ago, I think he was probably a top 10 corner in the country. This year, he could very easily be top 5. A really, really remarkable player, especially in coverage. And if you watched him at Washington really at all last year, you saw what he is capable of. So definitely a huge pickup there. And then you pick up someone like Brandon Johnson on that back end to be that safety that you need to kind of help over top. They also brought in Kobe Savage, brought in Cam Alexander from UTSA. This is a really, really good rebuilt unit because it's not just guys that are talented. It's not just guys that you're bringing in like Peyton Woodyard that they brought in who's uber talented, but is a freshman. You don't necessarily want to throw him out there. You got one of the most consistent corners in the country in Jabbar Muhammad. You got Cam Alexander, who played incredible football at UTSA, is making a step up, but is still a very talented kid that I think will be more than fine. Kobe Savage played, I believe, started 3 years at Kansas State, played plenty of snaps and really good football over there. And then Brandon Johnson was one of the best back-end players in the ACC this past year. So overall, you look at this Oregon defense, they've done an incredible job of rebuilding this. And all of the stuff that I talked about earlier, the edge rushing should be a ton better. The run defense should be a ton better, and all of that lends itself to them being a lot better on the back end. So I do think it's going to be a worked out thing. Maybe they have to have a guy like Aaron Flowers or Peyton Woodyard kind of play some depth piece type roles, but overall, this is an entirely different back end for Oregon from 2023 to 2024, and they're hoping they get a little bit different of results, that's for sure. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the players that just have to have a big-time fall camp, the ones that have to hit for their team to get where they want to go. I believe this will be the last group of teams that we give you guys on this. We have 6 teams, so we'll break them down right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more.
GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the things that these big-time contenders just have to take steps forward in 2024 if they really want to compete. A ton of big-time things that they're just going to have to be a little bit better at if they want to lift that trophy at the end of the year. So we'll continue doing that probably throughout next week, breaking down some of the other title contenders, but wanted to start with the Big Four, as I'm calling them, as we head into this year. But let's get into segment 3 here, and let's talk about the players that just have to make the most of the next couple of weeks. Some are because of injury, some are because I just think that's where they need to kind of hit that next level in their college football, or in this upcoming year. So let's get into this real quickly, and we're going to start with Texas A&M, and we're going to start with Ruben Fothery, a very, very talented player, someone that absolutely can play really good football. But when you look at last year, A&M was hurt by their O-line probably more than any other part of this team. I think they had tons of talent all across this roster, but it was a tough time keeping Connor Wegman upright, and that was why he went out with an injury, and they had a number of different troubles throughout the year. A lot of it was because of that offensive line. Now, I think Trey Zune is going to be incredible over at that left tackle. He does need to take a little bit of a step forward, but should be more than fine there. The right tackle is where I'm focused with Ruben. I think he's one of those guys that has a huge effect on what this team's success is going to be, because I think their interior players are solid. I do think they have guys on that interior that are going to be able to make plays, although losing someone like Bryce Foster as your center does not help that at all. I do think they'll be more than fine. Making sure that you have the tackles to give Connor Wegman time to step up in the pocket and make a throw is hugely important, and it doesn't matter if it's left tackle or right tackle. It's going to hurt you one way or the other, so he has to make sure that he has a great couple of weeks, and they're heading into the season feeling really good about those two tackle positions. The other side of this is the back end part of the defense, because frankly, I think they have plenty of dudes back there. I'm not necessarily worried about Bryce Anderson. I'm not necessarily super worried about Tariq Chappelle, although would love to see him take a little bit of a step forward. But the guy I want to talk about is BJ Mays. He came over from UAB this past cycle and is a very talented kid. Is one of those guys that if you watch the UAB tape, it looks like a Power 5 kid playing in Group of 5 conference, and frankly it was for quite some time. So a very talented kid. I think when you look at this back end, Bryce Anderson, I'm not worried about a bit. Tariq Chappelle, I think, is going to be fine. I think Dalton Brooks is a really fun player. You need someone at that other corner position across from Tariq Chappelle that you can feel really confident in, because it's not like A&M is playing one-trick pony type wide receiver groups. They're playing wide receiver groups that are as deep as can possibly be, whether it's Texas, whether it's, I'm blanking on the rest of their schedule, but there's plenty of ones out there that could cause them trouble. I believe they play LSU. That's absolutely another one that could cause them plenty of trouble, and you're going to need corners on the outside that you feel really good about. So overall, I think BJ Mays could be that guy that kind of just brings everything together. I think they're very, very close to being where they want to be on that back end. Another player, playing at an elite level like BJ Mays would definitely put you over the hump there. But let's continue on to USC here, and Bear Alexander is the layup on this list. Frankly, both of these were layups, but Bear Alexander especially. They need a difference maker on the interior of that defensive line, and if you walk off the bus and you see these guys walk off the bus, Bear Alexander looks different. He's the one that you look at and you say, man, that is a big dude. That is a guy that absolutely will be playing Sunday football at some point in his career, and I do think he's one of those guys that opens up so many doors for them on the defensive side of the ball. I don't think it's any, secret that this is not the deepest defense in the world. It's not even the most talented defense in the world, regardless of you bring in depth or not. But you look at Bear Alexander, he's a guy that if you can feel confident that he's walking out there and he is going to hold it down. Let's say he is a Tavondre Sweat type player for this team, where you put him on the field, and maybe he's not on the field all the time, but the second that he steps on the field, the entire game changes, the entire identity of your defense changes. you feel really confident, because it's not necessarily that, maybe the back end guys get a little bit torched. Maybe it's not the most pretty thing all the way throughout, but if you know that when a number 90 steps on the field, he's going to make a number of plays for you, that's really all you need as a USC defense. You're not trying to take leaps and bounds steps forward this year. You're just trying to make more plays than you did a year ago, and getting this guy in really good situations will absolutely lead to that. But the other guy I want to talk about is Kamari Ramsey. He came over from UCLA, was the leader of that back end for much of last year, and was a huge pickup for this team going into this year, because not only is he a very good communicator, a very talented player, but he understands what D'Anton wants. And that's a thing that a lot of USC players are having to figure out throughout spring and fall camp, but this guy's coming in and helping that. He's kind of another coach on that defense to kind of make sure everyone is fully up to par and fully up to what they need to be doing on a specific play. So I think is a huge addition. I think they have talent on that back end. I think the structure of that back end was an absolute nightmare last year, and having someone in that back there that is kind of a player's coach in sorts definitely will be a huge help for them. Moving on to Virginia Tech, this is kind of an interesting too, because they're both offensive players. Even though I think this Virginia Tech offense is going to be more than fine, I think they could be elite, and I think that's kind of what I'm going for here. Malachi Thomas is the backup running back for the Hokies going into this year, and the run game is not necessarily going to be an issue. I don't necessarily think they're going to really struggle to run the ball, especially with someone like Kyron Drones calling the plays. They'll be more than fine running the ball. But what I will say is, if they want to take that big time step forward, if they want to, really hit the ceiling that this offense is absolutely capable of hitting, they're going to have to take a little bit of that pressure off Drones. They're going to have to make sure that they have running backs that they can go to down after down and feel really confident. Now, they do still have Baishal Tootin, a very talented running back that I believe rushed for about 900 yards a year ago, and he will be the feature back. There's no two ways about that. But we talked about it yesterday, a change of pace back, a different back that you can throw out there and feel confident in, is the difference between a good offense and a great offense. So I think this kind of opens up a ton of different things for them, and it takes the weight off Kyron Drones' shoulders just a little bit in the run game so he can focus a little bit more on the pass game. So definitely will help them a ton there. And then in the pass game, Ollie Jennings is someone I want to talk about because I really like this offense. I really like this wide receiver core. I think Jalen Lane's a good player. I think Daquan Felton's going to be a really fun player this upcoming year. I think Ollie Jennings could transform this offense. He came over from Old Dominion before last year, before getting injured early on in last year, and didn't have the year that he wanted by any means. But he is absolutely back to full strength, and he is a scary wide receiver that they brought in. I do think he's a guy that could lead them in receiving. I mean, Daquan Felton led him in receiving a year ago, only 667 yards for him a year ago. So the unit needs to take a big-time step forward overall. I think Ollie Jennings is the guy that kind of let them reach the heights that they absolutely want to over there. Moving on to Kansas, I want to talk about Bai Jobe, who came over from Michigan State. He is currently dealing with a bit of an injury, so some of this might have to wait a little bit to get rolling, but apparently before that, he was the game changer on that defense. He was the guy that was really standing out, and when you look at this Michigan State team, it's not going to be perfect. It's probably going to be a pretty frustrating year, but if you have, I said Michigan State because I'm looking at Michigan State. When you look at this Kansas team, there's plenty in place for them to make some noise. I think the one area that I worry about is true difference makers on that defensive side of the ball. I think this guy could absolutely be that for them and really open so many doors for the Jayhawks. So I think this is a huge player for Kansas coming over from Michigan State and definitely will be huge for this team. I'm staying on the defensive front for my next pick. DJ Withers needs to take a big-time step forward. He's kind of jumping into a starting role more often than he ever has before, and he's going to be facing some really experienced offensive lines. And when you look at the difference maker in this conference, I think there's a number that you could go to, but the trench play is going to be huge. You know, who can get through those really, really experienced, really strong offensive lines and make those plays in the backfield are going to be huge for their team. And if Kansas is going to pull this off, they're going to have to be much better on that defensive front than they were a year ago, and I think this is a guy that can open that door for them. Moving on to Arizona, Montana Lamonius Craig is the guy that I want to talk about because he was the one that made tons of waves in that spring game for Colorado back in 2023. He then transferred to Arizona. It was kind of a little audition for some other teams where he had a little bit under 300 yards a year ago. So not necessarily the year that he wanted or Arizona wanted, but I think this is a special kid. I think this is an offense that can really open up things. And when you look at this offense, all the energy is around Noah Fafita, Tatori McMillan being those elite players that they are. They have other guys that need to step up. If they're going to be able to play with a lot of these Big 12 defenses that they're going to have to face, you need multiple guys. That's just the reality. I think Raymelo Murphy is someone to watch there. But Lamonius Craig's ability to stretch the field, I think, opens so many doors for them. So I think you look at this next couple of weeks, Arizona has, a good footing. They have enough players to make all the plays that you need them to make. If they want to be dynamic, if they want to be a top 5, top 10 offense in the country, I think someone like Montana Lamonius Craig could kind of open up that deep pass the way that it definitely was a year ago, but you would like to see a little bit more of that for sure. And then I want to talk about Chuba Mahi, a very, very talented defensive lineman, and this is somewhat because of who they lost on that defensive line. Bill Norton and Tia Savea both made their way over to Texas after Johnny Nansen made his way over to Texas, and they're going to need guys to step up. There's no two ways about that. He is a very, very talented kid, has someone that has not necessarily played too much football early on in his career, but has to take that step forward. One way or the other, he's going to have to make those plays on Saturdays, and it's going to be really interesting to watch this group more than anyone else because they have talented guys on this defense pretty much top to bottom. And when you look at someone like Takario Davis on that back end, an absolute monster. Really, really like him. I think they have plenty of dudes, but you need some difference makers up front that they had a year ago. Got to make sure you're able to replace them with someone like Chuba Mahi. But let's move on to a last Big 12 team here in Iowa State, and I want to start with Eli Green. He is a backup wide receiver for this team, and frankly, I love the duo that they have up front with Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins, and I'm not necessarily worried about them throwing the ball, but if they want to be dynamic, if they want to be a total difference maker on the offensive side of the ball, I think this is a guy that would definitely get a lot of reps. He had 877 receiving yards and over 1,100 all-purpose yards at North Dakota State a year ago and is a very, very talented kid, someone that could definitely deliver right away. And I think when you open up this offense, there are a number of things to like, but the number of options at wide receiver is definitely a little bit of a worry. If you can up that with at least one more guy in that group, you'll feel great about what you have. And then Jalen Travis came over from Princeton to join that Iowa State team. He is going to be starting at that left tackle position, it seems. And they're going to need him to be perfect. They're going to need him to be absolutely on money from pretty much day one. They got an Iowa game in week 2 that they do not want to lose. And I think Rocco Becht is one of those players that is able to make a lot out of nothing. You know, some pressure comes, he's able to handle it. The reality, though, is those guys can handle it. If they don't need to handle it, they feel a lot better about their day. So I do think this is one of those players that can open up so many doors, and Rocco Becht is so talented. So keeping him upright, letting him make the athletic plays that he's very capable of making is the most important thing for this offense, and Jalen Travis has got to have a huge couple of weeks as they head into a big-time season for them. But obviously, there are a ton of more players. You know, I could go around pretty much every team across the country, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to get all the way down to Vandy. Respectfully, I'm not going to get all the way down to Vandy, but we're going to take our third break here. When we come back, we're going to do some conference questions, wrap it up with the Big 12 today, and then we'll get into a little bit of an update of all the headlines in the last segment. But stick with us, and we'll be right back with segment 4.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just got into all of the players that just have to have a huge couple of weeks as we head into this season, but let's get into some conference questions now. I realize that says ACC, I apologize, it should say Big 12, but we will do our best to handle that today. The conference questions for the Big 12 are plentiful. There's no two ways about that, and I'm just going to go ahead and take that down just to not distract people, but the conference questions around the Big 12 are huge and definitely will be ones that will be really interesting to break down throughout the season, but the biggest one I have is just, where is the gap in this conference? It feels like every other conference, you can kind of break down where at least the relative gap is. Some are deeper in the conference than others. When you talk about the Big Ten, I feel like there's a comfortable gap after those 4 teams up top. I think I feel pretty good about that. The ACC is a little bit muckier, but you could make the argument that there's a gap after those top 3 teams in Florida State, Clemson, and Miami. And then over in the SEC, I think that one's a little bit tougher to pin down as well, but there's definitely a gap a little bit towards the bottom after that middle tier where you can see a little bit of a drop-off. The Big 12 is a little bit different. You look at the teams sitting up top. Kansas State and Utah are the teams. I feel pretty confident in that. But Oklahoma State's right there with them. Oklahoma State is a really good team, but I don't see a huge gap between them, UCF, Arizona, Kansas, West Virginia, Iowa State, those type of teams. And I think that's not a considerable gap by any means. And then you can convince me there is a little bit of a gap between the other teams in this conference, but Colorado, TCU, Texas Tech could play pretty much any given Saturday with any one of the teams I just named up there. So I do think it's one of those things that there are gaps, there are little kind of off-ramps on all of these different tiers, but it's not by much. This is one of those conferences that you could make, I would argue, frankly, that Baylor, BYU, Cincinnati, Arizona is really where the fall-off is. Right before those teams, right after a Texas Tech or a TCU or a Colorado, I think those would be the teams where you could see a pretty considerable gap. But overall, this is a conference that goes about 10 deep, maybe even 11 deep, and it's an absolute nightmare to figure out how this is all going to shake out. But it's why it's the best conference in the country to me. It's why it's going to be so much fun to watch what's going on, because any given Saturday, pretty much any team in this conference could beat anyone else and could ruin the entire season for them. So it'll be a lot of fun to watch that, but definitely will be interesting to break all that down throughout the season. I do want to get into Cam Rising here for a second, because my question is, if Cam Rising is healthy, is anyone touching Utah? Because that's been the thing. Over the last 3 years, Utah has been played incredible football over in the Pac-12, and the only thing that's gotten in their way of winning a Pac-12 title has been this guy's health. That's the only thing that has really kept them from being that top team year over year and winning all these conference titles. So you look at this Utah team, and they have so much going their way. They have so much stability. I think bringing in Dorian Singer was one of the best pickups in the portal this past cycle. But overall, you look at what they can do on the football field, and I love KSU. I love Oklahoma State. I have much more questions about what I'm getting on a Saturday from those two teams than I do from Utah. And it doesn't necessarily mean to say that they can't compete with Utah if they're playing their A-plus football. It's just to say there's more variability in those teams, as I see it, than there is in Utah. So I think this is one of those teams that there are teams that can knock them off. There's no two ways about that. Whether it's Oklahoma State, KSU, Kansas, maybe even Arizona, all of those teams will have a shot any given Saturday. My question is, going through a 12-game season, is there anyone that's going to be able to really keep up with this team? Is there anyone week over week that is going to be able to win the number of games that Utah is going to be able to win and play the level of quarterback play that Utah is going to get? So it's one of those things that is going to be kind of hard to figure out. We'll obviously figure out only if Cam Rising is healthy and they run away with this thing. We'll know an answer. If he gets hurt and they don't, maybe we'll know an answer that way. But overall, I think there's teams that can compete with this team, no two ways about it. And frankly, I do think there's a world where Cam Rising stays healthy and they don't make the Big 12 title. But as of right now, going into the season, you see what Utah's been able to do over the last couple of seasons. They're going to be elite executing on offense. The defense comes along as it does every single year. So it's not crazy to say that if that guy's on the field, Utah is comfortably the team to beat and one that could possibly even run away with this conference. But let's move on to Let's move on to Kansas State here, and let's talk about all of the running game things that they're going to be able to do this upcoming year. When you have the trio that they have, things can get really special in a hurry. And I think that, frankly, they could have the most explosive rushing offense in the entire country. DJ Giddens is one of the most underrated running backs in the entire country. I can't imagine why people are not talking about him more. But Dylan Edwards in the open field is outright special. We all know that. But the guy that everyone wants to watch, is Avery Johnson in the open field. That's the thing that makes this running defense incredible. Everyone has a really good running back duo, at least when you're trying to compete for a national title. You have a DJ Giddens, Dylan Edwards type duo in your room. There's no two ways about that. Not everyone has Avery Johnson. Frankly, no one else has Avery Johnson, although if you wanted to draw a comparison, Aiden Childs up in Michigan State. But beside the point, I do think this is a guy that is downright special. With the ball in his hands, he can do so many different things on the outside and make pretty much anyone miss. So he's one of those guys that opens up so many different doors, and I think you look at this rush defense, they're going to be able to break some crazy, crazy runs this year. And maybe that's the difference in this conference, which we'll get into here in a second. But it's one of those really, really interesting things where I really think this is a offense that could be that explosive and could be that dangerous and could kind of set an interesting precedent for what everyone else has to deal with as we head into this season around Kansas State. But I want to move on to Colorado here. And what do they need to make a Cinderella run? What is the thing that they need to kind of jump off the page and make a big time leap this upcoming year? And if they do that, then nothing is off limits. It's very simple. It's the line of scrimmage play, and everyone knows that from inside that program, outside that program. People that don't even follow college football know that they have a line of scrimmage problem in Boulder. So they took incredible steps to fix that problem. Jordan Seaton being the main among them. Keeping Shedeur Sanders upright is the number one thing on this team, because he is one of the best quarterbacks in the country. I know there are people that have some opinions on him one way or the other. The kid can put the ball anywhere he wants, and it's another reason why I found all the discourse around the fake, or the quote-unquote fake clip, the very real clip that came out from Colorado practice, because they don't have to do that. Shedeur makes plenty of plays that they can put on highlight reels that they do not have to splice together. But overall, keeping that guy upright, making sure he can stand in the pocket and make plays is the only thing that is stepping in this team's way. They have so many talented receivers out wide. Injuries also could totally derail this, but I'm not picking with injuries in mind. So I do think that's a huge thing for them. When you can keep this guy upright, when you can keep Shedeur Sanders upright and let him digest an defense, there's very few that he can't pick apart. There's very few that he can't torch, and that's going to be the biggest thing. You know, the Cinderella run is in the cards for this team. They just got to execute at the moments that are most important, and it's going to come down to those line of scrimmage play and really Jordan Seaton in so many different ways. So definitely a lot on the freshman's shoulders. But finally, what is the biggest difference maker in this conference? I think when you look at this conference, there's so many things that a lot of these teams have in common, whether it's, returning a ton of experience and returning production, a lot of experienced quarterbacks in this group. There's a lot of teams that don't have a lot of variables. You feel pretty confident about what you're getting on a certain Saturday. Oklahoma State, Mike Gundy plays really good football. We know that. They're a little bit more variable, as we've seen over the last couple of years, but you're going to get good football. Iowa State returns a ton of people. You're going to get solid football from that group. I feel very confident in that. But on the other side of that, a lot of other teams have that. A lot of other teams have continuity. A lot of other teams have quarterbacks that feel comfortable in their system. So what's the difference? What's the thing that will put that team that ends up winning the title? What will put them over the hump that they need to get over? Is it, an outright talent level, which would give maybe someone like Kansas State or Colorado a little bit better of a shot? Is quarterback play and line of scrimmage play the most important thing? Because, that might lend itself to Utah a little bit. Is it explosivity? And that's kind of the one that I want to kind of get into, because you talk about a conference that is going to be solid. It's going to be a little bit monotonous at times, because you're going to get such solid games that don't have a lot of penalties, don't have a lot of turnovers, don't have a lot of that, mucky stuff that kind of does make college football fun in a way. But it's definitely going to be one of the more consistent college football conferences, at least in terms of play. I think the results will be all over the place, but that's beside the point. I do think when you look at explosivity, when you look at those one plays that you can get 80 yards down the field, totally change the scoreboard, change the game, change the way that the other team is thinking, will likely be the biggest difference here. It's not going to be, these monotonous drives that you work your way down and finally get into the end zone. Although those are very, very important for your team, those aren't necessarily what I'm looking at as the big time plays. I think when Avery Johnson can get loose for a 70-yard run, or when Micah Hudson on Texas Tech can get deep and catch an 80-yard pass, whatever that looks like, getting those big time plays that change a game in an instant, I think could be the thing that changes this entire conference that, frankly, when you look around it, has a ton of teams that are going to play just good football. They're going to play really solid football, and they're going to be ready to roll pretty much every single day. So maybe it's getting over top. Maybe it's making those plays that a lot of others miss. Maybe it's, making that 70-yard touchdown in the middle of the second quarter that makes all of the difference. So that tends to be what I'm watching right now, the explosivity of these offenses, and whoever has that the most, I tend to believe it's going to be Kansas State, but obviously there's plenty others that could make that happen. So definitely will be really, really interesting to watch. But let's take our last break here, and when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of a Friday headline wrap up. There's so many different headlines to get through, but we'll jump into it right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all the different things going on in the Big 12, some of the different questions I have in that conference as we head in. That's going to be one of the crazier conferences in the country, so definitely some questions that were tough to figure out. But let's get into a little bit of a Friday headline roundup. There are a ton of things that I want to catch you guys up on, and we'll start with a very, very fun one. Let's start with one that definitely everyone saw, I feel like, and everyone kind of loved. Pitbull is getting involved in college football, folks. He has bought the naming rights for the FIU stadium. Definitely a very, very interesting thing. He is obviously a Miami guy, so not overly surprising that this is where he wants to be. He said in his reasoning for this, he loves an underdog. He loves the team, that he didn't want to go to Miami because everyone knows about Miami. FIU deserves a little bit more love. A very, very interesting thing. So it's turning to Pitbull Stadium. It is going to be Pitbull Stadium going forward down there in Miami for FIU. He is paying $1.2 million over the 5 years that he has this contract. This is very interesting. There's no two ways about that. Frankly, I would love if more of these celebrities kind of got into that realm. If, in 5 years, if Vanderbilt was playing in Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson Stadium, I'm all on board. I think it's a weird way that I didn't necessarily see this branding rights going, but I'm all in for it. I can't argue with that by any means. I do want to move on to the SEC here. It seems like they are moving towards injury reports for this year. This is something that has been a hot topic in the SEC for quite some time, and frankly, I have a inkling that it was because Nick Saban was in the room that this didn't happen earlier, but that's beside the point. I do think this is something that probably had to happen. A lot of SEC schools have been pretty known for just not disclosing anything, and I understand wanting to play your cards close to the chest, but it is, part of the game. It is part of the way that a lot of this stuff works. So a mandatory injury report is something that could be coming into effect. Has not been officially approved yet, but it sounds like it will be before the 2024 season. Now, the Big Ten did this last year, was the first Power 5 conference to institute a game day availability report. So this is kind of a new thing. Not necessarily, the SEC is not necessarily doing anything differently than everyone else, but it will be very, very interesting to watch this unfold. I do think it'll be one of those things that it'll be kind of interesting to see how this is governed. If a guy isn't too much injured but gets injured early in the game, do they say, he had a lingering one that you should have disclosed? I don't really know how all that's going to work, but LSU and Florida have been doing this for the past little bit, so they will have no problems in Baton Rouge and Gainesville handling this, but everyone else is definitely going to have a little bit more on their plate come game day this time, this year as we head into it. The other team I want to talk about is Kentucky. They were forced to vacate some wins for NIL violations, which I'm not a big fan of vacating wins in general. This is a very, very interesting case nonetheless, though. So it sounds like Kentucky was giving appropriate penalty, or was given appropriate penalties from level 2 violations that happened within the program. There were at least 11 football players that got impermissible benefits that did not perform work in the NIL field. So as you all know, there is a lot of these deals that are contingent on working 50 hours of community service or doing a project out in the community or whatever it is. Some of those players just didn't perform those tasks and still got paid, and that's the big time issue. So 8 of those players went on to compete while ineligible because they violated this rule. So that's where this is coming from. If you have players on the field that aren't supposed to be there, you kind of have to vacate those wins. And Kentucky also faces 2-year probation and a fine. It's one of those things. NCAA, attacking Kentucky a little bit easier. Let's just put it that way. So definitely a very interesting story that will affect this program going forward, but one that, maybe we don't hear too much from after this, but it'll be interesting to watch that unfold. Let's get into Steve Cragthorpe. He passed away at the age of 59, a former Louisville head coach, a very, very talented head coach, had been diagnosed with Parkinson's over a decade ago, and had been struggling with that. So first of all, obviously, condolences to his family. Hope that they can find some type of peace during this time, but this is a very fantastic football coach. This is a guy that was hired at Tulsa early on, and he came into a program that was 2-23 in 2021 and 2022. From that point on, they immediately started turning things around. They won 8 games in every one of his seasons. They were 8-5 in his first season, 9-4 in 2005, with the team's first bowl win since 1991. So he gave Tulsa fans a ton to cheer about around that early 2000s era, and I'm sure they remember this man very, very fondly. His success went on at Louisville, didn't necessarily have the career that he wanted to at Louisville, ended with a 15-21 record, and was fired after, I believe, 3 years in the program. So wasn't necessarily there too long, but still someone that left a very lasting legacy across the entirety of college football, but particularly in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and brought that program where they wanted to be. And it was a really, really magical story for sure. But obviously, condolences to his family. Hopefully they can find some peace during this time, and a really, really remarkable coach that left us far too soon, that's for sure. But let's move on to Dylan Raiola. There was a very interesting conversation that was going on around Twitter around Dylan Raiola when he showed up on campus for fall camp. He was walking around the campus wearing, sunglasses. He had his hair going. He had everything going, and immediately everyone said that's Patrick Mahomes. Immediately everyone tied him to the quarterback over there in Kansas City, and frankly, I don't blame you. He wears the number 15. If you've seen this guy throw a football, it looks a lot like what Patrick Mahomes does throwing a football. And frankly, that makes a lot of sense. I don't mean to make anyone feel old here, but Patrick Mahomes entered the league about 6-7 years ago at this point. Dylan Raiola 18 years old. So right when Patrick Mahomes was really becoming that, icon that he is right now, that's when all of this, all of the stuff with his how he was going to go about his throwing motion, how he was going to do footwork, all of that stuff was developed right around that time. So it's not crazy to me by any means that a guy that has the physical talent that Dylan Raiola does is able to handle that type of thing and modeled his game after that guy. And Matt Rule says the exact same thing. He says, he wears the number 15, he patterns his game a lot, and there's no one better that you could pattern your game after, at least if you can make those plays that Patrick Mahomes can make. So it was kind of just an interesting conversation. Patrick Mahomes gave him a little bit of a shout out. Tyreek Hill was the one that was like, that looks exactly like Patrick. So it was kind of an interesting little thing that happened around Twitter over the last couple of days. And maybe he's that guy. Maybe he is Patrick Mahomes and we're just waiting to figure it out. So that would be really, really fun to watch. But finally, there were some new jerseys that came out around the country, and I know some people don't necessarily care about this too much. Frankly, for me, it's just another sign that we're getting a little bit closer to football. So I love talking about it. There's no two ways about that. I want to start with Oklahoma. They added a new throwback jersey that they are debuting this year. I don't know exactly when they are debuting it, but be on the lookout for that. I love the white helmets on this one. So cool. But the jerseys are in honor of Bud Wilkinson, one of the best Sooners of all time and a legend in those 1940s teams that were really dominant. So a very, very cool thing there. I do really like these jerseys and cannot wait to see them broken out. Illinois did a even more of a throwback. They went further back than Oklahoma did in this one, and they have the leather helmets. They're not leather, obviously, but they have the look of leather helmets, which is very, very cool. This will make their appearance on October 19th against Michigan. It honors a game that they played against Michigan, I believe, back in the 1920s. I can't exactly remember the exact date, but definitely a very, very interesting thing, a cool story behind that one, so absolutely love that one. And then finally, Oregon released a new jersey. Imagine that. It's like the day's turning, Oregon releases a new jersey, but very much like this one, a very, very cool design. When you have the colors they have to work with and when you have Nike right around the corner, a lot of special things can happen. So definitely very, very cool jerseys there. And I understand this is not the most interesting topic in the world. This is not the most newsworthy topic in the world, but it just means we're getting closer. It just means we're a day closer. We're a second closer to this thing kicking off. We're 15 days out at this point, and I cannot wait. We're going to kick things into high gear next week and really start getting some. Maybe we'll do some record predictions. Any questions that you guys have that you want me to unpack, I'm more than happy to do that. So we have plenty of stuff coming up over the next couple of weeks as things really start to heat up. Things get very, very real over the next couple of weeks, and then we lace them up, toe meets leather, and we're ready to roll. So cannot wait for that to happen. Obviously, you start to get that nervous energy right around now with your team kind of getting closer and closer to playing, and it's the best time of the year. There's no two ways about that. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. With the Olympics going on, we got plenty of people covering that. We got plenty of people covering all the basketball news, all the football news from around the NFL. A million people doing really, really good work across every sport you could possibly want. So anything you need in the world of sports, come on over to GSMC and we totally have you covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.